We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding Suspendables, Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Tuesday, 10:30, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod. Also on YouTube at the American Radicals Podcast. We come to you every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern Time. Appreciate you as always, guys, for joining us. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, a follow, a subscribe. If you listen to us on iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, the audio format of the podcast, make sure you give us a nice 5-star rating, 5-star review. Or if you're checking us out over at X America News, give us a share. Do all the things. Tell a friend or 12, trying to expand out the brand here on the American Radicals Podcast, tricking the algorithms so that we can radicalize more Americans to our way of thinking on this hobbyist podcast. It is, after all, a hobbyist podcast. Got to issue the qualifier. I am here as an American citizen, exercising my First Amendment right to share my opinion on things that are in the news, open source information, nothing that is classified. And I am absolutely, under no circumstances, representing any particular agency, arm, bureau, division, department of the federal government of the United States of America. So what are we going to talk to? Because today is going to be heavy hitting. We're going to be talking about some egregious things. And I'm going to give you the cold, hard facts, very cold, hard facts, because it is cold here in the land of milk and honey. You can tell I'm wearing the Sherpa hoodie from my buddy at GOB Actual Store. I had to bundle up. Guys, I could see my breath this morning. I'm not happy. So I'm going to bring you the cold, hard facts. I'm going to have to bring out the anger and the rage on latest bombshell revelations about the January 6th pipe bomber. We're going to have to weigh in on that one. There's a government reopening happening, and we'll have to get into some of the details surrounding that. The baseball players are now getting indicted by our FBI, not just the basketball players, the baseball players facing some criminal charges. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, is slow rolling Epstein transparency and using the government shutdown to do that. The Subway sandwich bandit, he got acquitted. A Texas man was just arrested for memes that gave people a case of they having the bad feelings. Meta making billions of dollars off of fraudulent advertising. We'll have to have a conversation about the 50-year mortgages and tariff rebates. So a lot to get to today, but I alluded to the hoodie that I'm wearing today. So before we get to all of that, let's thank our underwriting sponsor for the day. I mean, it's an affiliate. We're not making any money off it. We're just sending people over to check out some American businesses. So let's thank my buddy Store. That's at GOB Actuals Store. He's still on hiatus as he's chasing down some illegal aliens. You can go and support him and support his family at the-suspendables.com, the-suspendables.com. Don't forget the dash, because if you don't put it in there, you get sent to a hockey website. But check out what Garrett's got over in the store. Got some t-shirts out there, some sweatshirts as we're coming in now, even in Florida on the cold weather. You got a chance to see what he's got available. I know he is working on some extra merch. New stuff is going to be emerging soon, but for the time being, trying to sell out what he's got left in inventory. Let's support him and the O'Boyle family clan. He's working those kiddos to the bone, turning out these t-shirts, sweatshirts, ball caps at the-suspendables.com. So check them out. And without further ado, let's begin today's program with a couple of adjoining pieces coming from my buddies. They are, after all, my buddies. I don't participate in any sort of journalistic endeavors of one Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker at The Blaze. I just comment on what they bring out in open source, current events, newsworthy content. And let's talk about this J6 pipe bomb. But in order to do that, we have to sort of set the background, because those guys over at The Blaze, they did an excellent job of crafting how they were going to bring about the story that was the bombshell over the weekend. And it was the identity of the alleged January 5th/6th pipe bomber. But let's set it up and go through a couple different stories that came out of the Blaze from Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker. Now, the first one, we did actually a long form show. It was a collaborative effort between the Kyle Seraphin show and this one, where we interviewed Joe Hanneman about it. But just as a refresher, the headline from the Blaze is Video Sleuth Challenges FBI January 6th Pipe Bomb Narrative Unearths New Evidence. And this was about Armitas. That is the pseudonym of the individual who is an expert at video review and was able to look at what's available out there and poke some holes in the narrative that got pushed out about the January 6th pipe bomb that the FBI was pushing out there. And according to this piece, the DNC pipe bomb was planted January 5th, but it was retrieved a few hours later so that it wouldn't be discovered too soon and then put down at a more convenient time, which also conflicts with how it had a 60-minute egg timer on it and yet was planted multiple hours ahead of time. It wasn't necessarily a viable device. Now, there's also video released by the FBI that was digitally altered, and that made it more difficult to identify a suspect. And that's where Joe Hanneman kind of got into the speculation that the FBI might be less than honest with the American people, might have lacked candor, and might have actually been involved in some sort of cover-up, was what really Joe Hanneman put out there. He said, we're within a whisker of making and connecting those dots at the time. It was also worth saying that the pipe bomber originally tried to plant the device that was eventually found at the DNC, Democrat National Committee. It was originally put outside the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, but it kind of fell apart so that would-be alleged pipe bomber had to retrieve it and move it and take an audible, and also did the same thing for the RNC, which really wasn't an RNC location. It was a dormitory, and then was moved subsequently to the Capitol Hill Club, which is just kind of like a clubhouse hangout for the Republicans in Washington, D.C. So both pipe bombs were actually relocated to secondary locations. And the final piece from here that was also relevant to some consideration, to some suspicion, I think warranted, of everything that was going on related to the January 6th pipe bomb, was how there was a geofence warrant that was dropped. And for those who don't know it, a geofence warrant that was used broadly to go after so many people connected with the Capitol events, the riots, or the insurrection, as it was characterized by many people on the Marxist, leftist, communist media, was a procedure where they send a search warrant out to the cell phone companies and said, give us every single cell phone that was in this particular area during this particular time. Now, it's a broad warrant, might have some constitutional concerns, but if that technology is available, one would think that it could probably be applied to somebody who was putting down a weapon of mass destruction at an obscure time when there wouldn't be a lot of cell phones there. It wouldn't be a general warrant. It would be very specific. They knew, because of the timestamps, when that person was there and the exact location. So let's use the exact same protocols to go out and find this person. And lo and behold, just bad luck. If we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no bad luck at all. The data was corrupted on the geofence warrant for the pipe bomber, but it wasn't. The cell phone providers actually disclosed later on that no, it wasn't. No, that data's good. The only data that was corrupted was geofence information connected to law enforcement cell phones. Well, that sort of lends credence to a theory that this individual who was planting these devices and then relocating these devices might have been law enforcement, or at least law enforcement adjacent, using a cell phone that could be attributable to a law enforcement agency. That kind of gets everybody very suspicious. The second piece, before we get to the big reveal, and that came out a week ago, was further information about use of force during the rioting at the Capitol on January 6th. So again, back to the Blaze, again, coming from my buddies, Joe Hanneman, Steve Baker. Headline here: Capitol Police repeatedly used lethal force on protesters early on January 6th. And that was according to some video review that went on. Now, Deputy Police Chief Eric Waldo claimed in a U.S. Capitol Police radio dispatch at 1:11 p.m. during the rioting that was going on that his officers were using, as he characterized it, quote, indirect firing. that would mean that they were not shooting people in the head. They were probably doing ricochets off the ground, but surveillance video contradicted it. At least 16 people were shot with projectiles, and 9 took shots to the top of the head. And one further thing here that's worth noting, and we will connect the dots, is that one of the Capitol Police officers whom the video showed firing on the crowd with a pepper ball rifle was Shawnee Kirkhoff. She's a certified trainer on the proper use of those weapons, so it didn't make a whole lot of sense for someone who's certified and deemed to be a subject matter expert on using less than lethal munitions to be taking headshots. Pepper balls struck protesters in the crowd, and there was also a speculation that if you were to do that, that might actually anger the crowd and make them more inclined to become violent, more inclined to riot. So definitely very suspicious that Shawnee Kirkhoff, being a subject matter expert in less than lethal, would be doing that. And then that brings us to the big reveal, the latest bombshell that came out over the weekend. It was teased and then pulled back and finally released. And that was from Steve Baker, from Joe Hanneman at The Blaze. They were cleared hot. Headline: former Capitol Police officer, a forensic match for the January 6th pipe bomber. Who could it possibly be? And why could it possibly be? Now, from this piece, we'll read some excerpts. A software algorithm that analyzed the walking parameters, including the knee bend, the hip extension, the speed, the length of the steps, the cadence, and a variety of other matters. It rated Shawnee Kirkhoff, the person taking headshots later on during the day, as a 94% match for the January 5th/6th pipe bomb subject. Now, Shawnee Kirkhoff was a Capitol Police officer for 4.5 years, and then she left a few months after January 6th for a security detail at the CIA. Former special agent, my buddy, Kyle Seraphin, he realized that he was doing surveillance at a location that was next door to where Shawnee Kirkhoff lived. And Kyle's talked about this before. His team, the special operations group that did the surveillance, they had a subject of interest. Wasn't necessarily the person that they believed was the pipe bomb subject, but they were assigned to this person because their identity was tied to a vehicle. It was also tied to a purchase of a Metro card. It was someone that they wanted to connect possibly to the January 6th pipe bomb to do all necessary follow-up investigations. So Kyle Seraphin led a surveillance team out there to go watch the place. And then, conveniently enough, they were pulled back. Now, Kyle came out with this years ago and was actually called out by then the ADIC of the Washington field office. That's the assistant director in charge, the number one guy in Washington field office, Stephen D'Antuono, who just randomly brought up Kyle's name and tried to dismiss what his concerns were. And that brings us all the way to an assessment of what this means. Now we have some facts and evidence. And I think the best and most logical thing we can do is kind of noodle out the plausible explanations, poke holes in things that should be dismissed, and leave things on the board which can't outwardly. So we have a Capitol Police officer who has been positively identified as the subject. Well, what could be the motivating factor? What could be the reason that Shawnee decided to go out there and lay down, well, as it was represented to us, a viable weapon of mass destruction? I mean, it was a bomb that lacked the bomb parts, but according to our FBI, it was always a bomb from the date that it had an inception. Leave it up to the FBI, who locked up concentration camp survivors for praying outside of an abortion clinic, to make the most pro-life argument ever. But I'm getting off subject right now. There was, at least in the early days, at least when that first piece that we went over, the revelations about the path that this individual took and how there were several locations originally that the pipe bombs were put down, and that they were relocated and put down at a more convenient time, and how the FBI may or may not have manipulated the video. there was some rumblings that there was going to be an excuse put out there about a training exercise. This was all just a training exercise, an inconvenient timing of it. We were planning this out, and it just happened to coincide with an insurrection at the United States Capitol on January 6th. Well, when Joe Hanneman and Kyle Seraphin and I did that collaborative podcast on October 9th of this year, that was being percolated as a potential explanation. And then I think we poked enough holes in it that it never actually reached fruition. The inception of the idea was there, but it was never put out because there were some problems there. If you were doing a training exercise, if you were the proctor of it, one of the instructors, you're helping launch this thing off, and you said, hey, the night before we do this training exercise, I'm going to strategically put some of these devices out there, which are inert. They contain some bomb making material so that the bomb dogs will alert on those. And we're just going to test and see if the people that are generally responsible for locating actual devices are up to snuff. Do they need more work? Do they need more training? We're going to do this training exercise, a field training exercise. Why would that individual be out there in the middle of the night ahead of time instead of maybe an hour or so before all the people participating in the exercise arrived? Well, if they were doing their due diligence, being a professional, they went out the night before because they're just so gung ho about the training. Why would they feel it was necessary to wear a disguise to do that? Huh. Seems like there's further intent there. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And also, if it was a training exercise in an honest mistake and just really terrible, awful timing with the day as it was characterized that was worse than 9/11 and the attacks on Pearl Harbor and the Civil War, according to our Marxist, leftist, communist media and Democrat Party, why didn't anybody come out afterwards and say, hey, guys, it was just bad timing? We were doing a training exercise. That pipe bomb? No, 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 no. That was not a legitimate weapon of mass destruction. It should not be taken into any consideration, any connection to the events at the Capitol. And yet, nobody came forward with that. The grainy surveillance footage being released to the public, why would you release that at all? If it was a training exercise, you would just say it wasn't necessary. There's no case there. We're not going to allow a Federal Bureau of Investigation to open investigations onto law enforcement people who are just engaging in a training exercise. And yet the case, we were assured by Christopher Wray, now Kash Patel, that it's still open. In fact, they're still putting out social media posts asking the public to help them, putting out videos, still offering a $500,000 reward. Well, if it was a training exercise, you would know that. You would have no reason to put out a reward. You would just be honest with the people. So I think there's lots of holes you can poke into the training exercise excuse. We can dismiss that, take it off the board, put it in the trash can. Now let's go to Shawnee. What's her motivations? Is she a lone wolf? Is she a terrorist? Well, she was on the phone during that. We know the data was corrupted. We couldn't identify the person because the data was corrupted, but we do have video evidence of this individual who's now been identified as Shawnee Kirkhoff on the phone, texting, using that device. So Shawnee's not a lone wolf. She's got some co-conspirators who were involved. So it's not necessarily limited to her, but maybe it's a small network. Do they have a manifesto, a motivation? We had, as has been advertised, viable weapons of mass destruction put outside both political parties' headquarters. Are they just anarchists? No further information right now. It would seem to be you'd have to have a motivation in order to do that. That's quite a big risk to be in one of the most surveilled cities in America. I mean, outside of perhaps Las Vegas, I would think that Washington, D.C. has more surveillance cameras than anywhere in the country. And you took that risk to make a political statement. And again, if you're motivated to do that, you got away with it. I mean, I guess the devices didn't work because they weren't viable. But if we're to believe that they were viable, even though the bombs didn't have the bomb-making parts in them in the right proportions in order to do anything, why was there no further WMDs put down? You didn't get your point across. Was there political change that was brought about? And you said, I'm good now. I've overthrown the system by instilling fear in the American people and gotten my political preferences across. So, mission accomplished. Let's hang a banner. We win. No, there was no achievement there. Or perhaps maybe there was an achievement there, which we'll get into. But again, Shawnee leaves the US Capitol Police and then she goes to work for the CIA in a security capacity. So she would have to have passed a polygraph. Does the CIA do crummy polygraphs? I mean, I don't think they're necessarily that reliable anyway. There's a reason you can't use a polygraph in court. It's not admissible. But the federal government and various arms of the intelligence community still use polygraphs. So she passed the polygraph. Did you do a crummy job when you asked her if she had ever done any sort of attack on the country? Or is she a true believer in something? She thinks she's doing something on behalf of the country. And why would she believe that? Could it be because she's had conversations with people in government who said, hey, go do the thing because this will help save America? Well, we should probably find out about it. Or did you just never do a polygraph on someone who we're putting inside the complex of the CIA to run security? It's either malevolence or incompetence, but still poking holes in the lone wolf theory. And just as an aside, I have a signed reinstatement agreement. I'm one of 10. So there's 10 of us, FBI whistleblowers, who have a signed reinstatement agreement with the Deputy Attorney General's Office for the United States of America. And me and the other 9 have been more heavily scrutinized than alleged pipe bomber by our federal government. Ridiculous. So then that takes us to the conspiracy. There could be multiple people involved here. It might actually expand out further than just a small terror cell, which kind of connect to the lone wolf, the lone wolf cell. How about a theory about a larger overall conspiracy? And I think that we've got some facts and evidence that are supporting that now. It's not just speculation. We saw Shawnee on the phone. We know that there's more than one person involved in this one. We know that there were audibles for those locations. Is she an expert on bomb making? Well, I mean, she might believe she is, which is why she created bombs that were just so perfectly not viable. Or did somebody else make them for her? We need to find out about that. We have lots of bomb making experts within the federal government. They do training on that. Her training's in pepper balls. I don't think it's in weapons of mass destruction. She's probably got some partners, probably using her government issued phone and working along with them. And then we have to ask some deductive reasoning type of questions. If in fact there was some larger government conspiracy here, a false flag operation, why would they drop the pipe bombs in areas ahead of time? Well, did they know that it was going to result in routing of resources away from the capital, which is what it did, which is what the speculation always was that the pipe bomb required lots of Capitol police officers to abandon their positions at the Capitol, leave, and then go do security and secure a perimeter around this device until it could be rendered safe. And when that happened, it left a shortfall of resources, material, manpower at the Capitol, which in effect left it vulnerable to a large gathering of individuals who engaged in an insurrection against the United States. Well, if you were planning on that, it would mean that you knew something was going to happen at the Capitol ahead of time, right? Why would you purposefully route personnel away from the Capitol in an effort to weaken it, make it more vulnerable, unless you knew that something was going to happen? We also had the headshots by Shawnee and others, which, as was covered in that Blaze piece, may incite people to become more violent. There's also been other reporting, and Steve Baker's discussed it, that there might have been some Department of, well, at the time, Department of Defense, now Department of War assets who were in the crowd, professional riot starters. Steve's gone far enough to even talk about directed energy weapons, but I'm way out of my depth on that. But let's just say people who were trained in how to start riots in foreign countries could have been there and present, and Steve has some evidence to that regard. We also have Shawnee testifying at January 6 trials, helping to push along the narrative, helping to get people convicted and sentenced for engaging in terrorist activities when she herself did the thing that was used to enhance people's sentences. It's worth mentioning, and I've said it before, there's never, ever before this revelation from Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker over at The Blaze, there's never, ever been an evidentiary connection between the events at the United States Capitol on January 6th and the pipe bombs. And I think that's very, very important because before this piece came out, we were making some logical leaps, some fallacies there that never made sense. I'm a trained investigator. You can't just make assumptions. It would be like presuming a act of violence in Washington, D.C., apart from the Capitol, was just connected to the Capitol because it happened in Washington, D.C. on the same day. That doesn't make sense. If somebody got carjacked in Southeast Washington, D.C., at the same time that there was rioting going on at the Capitol, it's the same logic connecting the carjacking to the pipe bomb. Well, I mean, there were some Metro police involved in investigating the carjacking. You were pulling resources away. So we should probably give an enhancement or try to connect some sort of criminal conspiracy to the carjacking and the Capitol. It's the exact same comparison. No connection. And yet, by connecting the pipe bomb and calling it an act of terrorism through being a weapon of mass destruction at a political location, we're able to enhance sentences in charging documents from the Department of Justice and through criminal complaints written by FBI agents that said that the pipe bomb was connected to the Capitol, ergo, the FBI could open up terrorism investigations rather than simple riot or picketing cases, and then ask judges to come down with harsher sentences on individuals because they were engaged in terrorist activity. The connection was never there and it was always inappropriate. But now we have a connection. We have a connection between the Capitol and the pipe bombs. But the connection is to a government actor, which again would mean that those enhancements were wholly inappropriate. And actually, the charges themselves might be wholly inappropriate, particularly if you have a government actor who's dropping fake pipe bombs and then trying to incite a riot so that they can jam up people there who are there for nothing more than exercising their First Amendment right to gather, petition, and redress their grievances in a public building. Then we also have Kyle Seraphin, my buddy, his surveillance team getting pulled away. Well, they were honing in on an individual who might be able to provide them with information. Just that person wasn't the pipe bomber, as we've now learned, but lived next door and might have provided a ride. And a simple knock and talk on that individual's house might have been fruitful for an investigator. They might have said, "Oh yeah, you know, I did happen to drive my car that day around that time. My neighbor needed a ride." Well, who's your neighbor? And now we're going to hone in. But instead, those FBI resources were pulled back almost as if they knew they were getting close to potentially finding an answer and connecting some dots. And that would mean that there were executives within the FBI who knew that they were getting close and deliberately took that action to pull them back. Again, keeping and preserving the narrative, keeping and preserving this case going. Further speculation, and we'll hone in on some speculation very clearly. I want to make sure that I am crystal clear. I do not know these things for a fact. I'm a hobbyist podcaster, going to share you my opinion on these matters, bringing my unique background, and then just thoughts generally on things that are now open source. Well, one thing that's open source is that there wasn't a National Special Security Event, NSSE, on January 6th that was declared. It never made any sense. And NSSE basically means that all the stops get pulled out by the federal government for security purposes. It would be on an inauguration day, July 4th fireworks, the Super Bowl. Actually, the co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, one of the books that he wrote was about reforming the Secret Service. And he talked about NSSEs being a problem because they were almost overused. Department of Homeland Security was being called upon to declare them all the time because everybody wanted to justify their existence and pull out all the goodies and use all those cool tools and go around and jump in the boats and the rivers and look under the bridges for potential nuclear devices. And that's really fun, good times, right? But also, there were private organizations that were specifically lobbying the Department of Homeland Security in order to get an NSSE declared for their event. So you'd have like some giant stockholder meeting in Omaha or a convention in Houston for people who were pharmaceutical reps. And they would say, hey, we've got lots of people. We could be vulnerable to some sort of terrorist attack. Can we make this an NSSE? Because we don't want to get killed by those terrorists. And the government would say, oh, yeah, we can't wait. And the private entity would say, this is fantastic. We don't have to pay for any of our own security. Uncle Sam does. The American taxpayer is paying for security for us so that we can network with each other and talk about, our best sales practices when we walk into a family doctor's office and try to hawk onto them the next gene juice. That's actually overused, the NSSE, the National Special Security Event. And yet, on a day where the government's intelligence reported back to them, they were going to have a large gathering of individuals to support Donald Trump. And also, there were, I think, a half dozen events scheduled outside the Capitol planned. They didn't do it. They didn't want to bring all those resources to bear. They didn't want to have the secure event. Why wouldn't they? We also had the denial of the National Guard. Capitol Police Chief at the time, Steve Sund, who's a friend to me. I mean, I'm acquainted with him. We're texting back and forth with each other about different things. He's on record. He requested the National Guard over and over and over again, and it was denied. Why would that happen? I mean, he wanted resources there. He was perceiving the event to be maybe getting out of hand. It was overwhelming his personnel. It was dangerous for them. He wanted to bring in the National Guard. The National Guard was on standby, and they were told, no, do not interact. In fact, it took so long, the delay for the National Guard, that I believe there were some police officers that made it down from New Jersey to the Capitol before the National Guard, which was, as the crow flies, away distance-wise from the Capitol. And they were told, nope, stand down. We're not bringing in the Capitol. We're not bringing in the National Guard to the Capitol until later in the day. Now, Steve Baker's brought this up too. His sort of speculation, his suspicion is that as the crowd grew, it was almost like we're going to allow them to get to a certain level of critical mass, and then we'll pull back. And then we'll allow them to get to a critical mass again, and then we'll pull back. Meanwhile, at the same time, inciting them through DOD assets, through firing pepper balls at their head, getting them amped up, getting them further agitated, more inclined to riot. And then we're going to bring them into the Capitol building, which from a security perspective, isn't that bad. I mean, it's an enclosed space. And they can have the building, but then we have the National Guard. We have all the federal law enforcement resources around it. I mean, we might have some sort of a standoff, but ultimately they're confined inside of a building. I think we're not looking as bad as if they were all descending on the Capitol, the city at large, and just spreading out, dispersing, and causing lots of chaos. You've now confined it to a particular area. And Steve's talked about that, bringing them in and bringing them in. And now I want to speculate. We know that Tarek Johnson asked for permission to evacuate members of Congress, senators, and congresspeople, and there was no response. Multiple times until he eventually said, I'll take the disciplinary hit, we're evacuating them. Here's my speculation. I think that we were allowing, now I say we, I think that the forces at B that were potentially conspiring were allowing the rioters, inciting the rioters, allowing them to get in the hopes that they got inside and were there with our elected officials. Not just interrupting the election certification, but engaging in maybe violence, or at the very least having the optics of being able to say that this marauding group of individuals, this group of insurrectionists, has taken the people's house and has taken our elected officials hostage. Now think about the optics. Now we send the National Guard. Now we roll the tanks up onto the steps of the Capitol, and we have an armed standoff with people who have taken senators and congresspeople hostage. Do you think that's a pretty easy thing to sell? That is indeed an insurrection? That's treason? Everybody connected with Donald Trump is a terrorist now. Now, that's speculation from me, but I'm having a really hard time poking holes in this theory. That to me makes sense because after January 6th, in the days, the weeks, and then the years afterwards, we kept hearing about insurrection, not rioting. That term has a really loaded meaning, and it was like they had it ready to go ahead of time, like they knew ahead of time that something was going to happen, and they were planning a public relations response to it. And just through the fact that most plans never survive first contact, just happenstance, coincidence, providence, things did not go as badly as the taskmasters, the puppeteers were hoping that they would. And they thought, all right, we got what we got out of it. And we really, really want to use this messaging. We want to preserve this narrative of an insurrection. So they went with it anyway, even though it didn't necessarily perfectly align with what they had hoped to get. It was close enough. And they had the ring of power. They had the ability to control a Department of Justice and an FBI and to use it to personally enrich themselves, to politically benefit themselves, to grow the bureaucracy, and to message how if you had reasonable questions about an election and you happened to go and exercise your First Amendment right, you were connected with insurrection, domestic terrorism, white supremacy, even though you voted for one white guy over another white guy, and also with somebody who had dropped a weapon of mass destruction, not one, but two weapons of mass destruction in our nation's capital. You were a terrorist. We had to go after you. Now, in the fallout, in the aftermath here, which again keeps me on this line of thinking and this speculation that something greater is afoot, can't help but notice a few things. Pretty quiet from our elected officials. And now you have Thomas Massey out there. You have Barry Loudermilk, who's in charge, I guess, of the new January 6th committee. Nobody else is out there who's in a position of prominence. Where's based Mike Lee? Isn't he concerned? Haven't heard anything from him. What about former members of Congress who are a little more outspoken that are in the public space? Nothing. Not hearing a word. It's almost as if, even if they're a Republican, and you would think that they have some modicum of loyalty to the current occupant of the White House, who was made to look pretty bad after this, and his supporters, who they seek their votes for every 2, 4, or 6 years. It's as if they don't want to present them in any sort of sympathetic light. Like they're kind of looking at the calendar and saying, we've got to run out the clock for the next 3 years on this guy, and we detest him. And really, what we hate worse than him are his supporters. We hate the fact that we have to get his supporters to vote for us, and we have to appease them and appeal to them. Let's just run out the clock. We don't want to make them look sympathetic. Like there might have been a false flag operation by the United States federal government in order to put those people into cages and destroy their lives so that they can ruin the political prospects of a would-be president because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. Let's just forget about it. Let's not talk about it. We're not going to hold any hearings on this, and we'll talk about Arctic frost instead. Then we have, there was some activation by former FBI agents who have a little bit of, I guess, of a public presence. And then, you got to give it to her. The great Julie Kelly, she had to come off the top rope, off the turnbuckle, and try to take out Steve Baker and Joe Hanneman for their reporting because this is her space and she's got some suspicions. The great Julie Kelly, who at best, just resents those guys because they were able to do a better job at journalism than her and find this when she's had access to this information for the last 5 years and she wasn't able to make that happen. But more likely, she was tapped. She was activated to do something. The great Julie Kelly, who I actually had contact with and discussed with her because she was covering down on the Gretchen Whitmer fake kidnapping scheme out of Michigan, and I gave her some more information about that, added some color to it because I wanted her to be right and I wanted to be a resource for her. The great Julie Kelly, who said that I owe her some modicum of debt because she gave me a one-sentence blurb for my book that basically nobody read. I did read her book. I doubt she read mine. I read her book about January 6th and couldn't help but notice how there was discussions about SWAT teams putting red dots on people's chests, which isn't a thing because she exists in a land of fantasy and just makes up a convenient narrative so that she can get lots of clicks and people to subscribe to her Substack and maybe get people who are in positions of executive leadership within federal law enforcement to be her ally, to give her some access, to elevate her. The great Julie Kelly, after I pointed out how she was wrong about the Mar-a-Lago search warrant and how that operations plan for the FBI, the standard form, the FD 888, always has a use of force statement on there, a deadly force statement, that it wasn't unique to Mar-a-Lago. And I told her that was not the hill to die on. I wanted her to be right. I didn't want her to report on things that were inaccurate. And her response was to say that I was a participant in entrapping people in Michigan and that my buddy, Garrett O'Boyle at GOB Actual, he caused a woman to miscarry in Kansas who was January 6th. Oh, and then to go on to her social media account and activate her supporters against the suspendables. And then to take the links to those online postings and then privately text them to me in the hopes that I would just get so enraged and so angry that I would say something mean and nasty in a text message. Then did she be able to embarrass me? Because apparently the great Julie Kelly is used to people being basically retarded, because that's the only way that would result in you falling for that obvious trap. The great Julie Kelly in the text messages with me, who still believes that the FBI wears a uniform. It sure would be a shame if those text messages ever emerged. It might prove to be problematic for her as being a reputable journalist who knows these things, because she is, after all, the great Julie Kelly. But at the very least, we know that the chain of command at the FBI is relatively intact, because over the weekend, as this was going on, we had the director out of touch. He was flying back from overseas. So when they did the crisis management meeting over the weekend, the co-deputy directors had to be there. And we know that the co-deputy director really likes Julie Kelly. So he activated her. The co-deputy director who offered me a job to work for the FBI and then got in there and lost my phone number. Offered me a job to be a BS detector for the people around him. The people that would be saying that, oh, yes, sir, we're still looking for that pipe bomber. But, now I'm getting a little bit personal about this. I want to get back to the topic at hand. And we are talking about the pipe bomb and the speculation. Now we're going to be opening the government, and I'll get off this subject. I think I've been on it for a long time, but closing it out here, we're going to reopen the government. The mere potentiality of a false flag operation that resulted in years-long persecution of American citizens who were engaged in perfectly legal activity, and if it fell afoul of the law, should have been kept within a local jurisdiction and prosecuted appropriately. But we don't even know if that's the case, because those people might have been incited to behave in a way that was not what they were intending to do because the government was doing it to them. That is a real reality that we might be facing right now. I think at this point, we have proof enough that when it comes to reopening the government, that this should be a serious consideration for whether or not we fund any of the agencies that are connected to it. You're telling me that we have evidence that a false flag was put out there, that we have evidence that multiple agencies and a plethora of individuals representing law enforcement at a federal capacity with the ability to take away your freedom and your life were engaged in essentially a put-up job against innocent American citizens, and we might give them all of the money that was supposed to be intended for their budget. That's an actual consideration, throwing aside the fact that we know about things like the Hunter Biden laptop cover-up, an Arctic frost, moms at school board meetings being investigated as terrorists, Catholics who prefer the Latin Mass being looked at as racially motivated violent extremists. The Epstein stuff, still no revelations about it. All of that, we could just put a pin in it. The only thing we have to know is that Miss Shawnee Kirkhoff from the Capitol Police, who was then connected to the CIA, and then the FBI preserving the narrative, all of these various agencies and departments of our federal government likely engaged in some modicum of a put-up job. And we're even contemplating giving them 1 red cent. It's disgusting. It's egregious. All right, that's a lot to talk about in this one, and I spent an exorbitant amount of time, but I will not leave the other matters that I had prepared for today because I think they're equally egregious, and we're going to churn and burn our way through them. But before we do, guys, let's thank an underwriting affiliate for the day outside of the merch store. Let's go to the M-Clip Company. Guys, go to m-clip.com, m-clip.com. We are in November, which means that Thanksgiving's coming, which means that Christmas is coming. Excellent gift idea. Check out m-clip.com. Luxury goods, money clips. They also have some things like cufflinks there and some leatherware. They can make these money clips with a lifetime guarantee. You can get your initials on them. They look sleek. You can get your favorite Major League Baseball team on them. If you want, you can get the Suspendables merch on there. They offer our nice badge and our emblem and our logo at m-clip.com. And they won't break the bank. You'll actually have some money to leave in your money clip if you use our promo code SUSPENDABLE, SUSPENDABLE, 10% off. Everything there. Check them out at m-clip.com. All right, so let's talk about some government reopening. Exciting. We have the record number of days. Aren't you excited? Can't you feel it? The hope is in the air, except if you are a supporter of small government, because I have yet to find an answer to the question of why do you want the government open? But I guess I'm outvoted. Reporting from NBC News, headline, senators reach tentative deal to end the government shutdown. Congratulations, everybody. Don't you feel wonderful? The agreement contains, as it's characterized, a minibus, which is a 3 full-year appropriations bills to fund certain departments, and then a continuing resolution to fund the rest of the government for the next couple of months through January. But in a major concession, because we're so based now, that Democrats are going to allow the Affordable Care Act subsidies to expire. That's Obamacare. And they're going to take it back up in a month or so and talk about how they're going to send lots of money off to illegal aliens. So I believe that the communist base of the Democrats is very upset because they definitely wholly want the Obamacare subsidies to continue. And the Republicans are going to claim a victory here. But I think we all kind of lose because the government opened, and the government likes to do put-up jobs and put American citizens in prison for no reason. But at the very least, if we're reopening the government, at least we can swear in all the members of Congress, right? Because we still have one that's outstanding. Did you know? She's a Democrat. She's from Arizona, and she hasn't been sworn in, even though she's been elected. This is the longest anybody's actually had to wait to get sworn in, and we'll figure out what the delay was. And shocker, it was connected to the government shutdown, whether or not that's appropriate or not. But the first piece I have to introduce it is from Spectrum News. Headline is that Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the few who's talking about the pipe bomb, he calls on the House Speaker to swear in an Arizona Democrat. Well, this guy's a libertarian. Why would he want that? It's almost like he cares about the process, not necessarily the outcome. So from this piece, Representative Massey has gathered all but one of the signatures needed for his discharge petition to force a vote on the release of the Epstein records. So, I mean, this is Congress games that are kind of stupid and retarded and gay. It's a petition to force a vote to release the Epstein documents, which is still never going to happen, but it's a symbolic gesture. And apparently, Tom Massey needs one more vote to put this over the top. And the Arizona Democrat has pledged to be that vote. So she hasn't been sworn in. She can't be that vote to force this discharge petition, to force a vote to release the Epstein records. The quote that I got from Tom Massey is, and it's pertaining to Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who's refusing to swear in this Democrat. Quote, he did this for two Republicans from Florida during a pro forma session, and he's not doing it for the Democrat. This is one of those things that really shouldn't be partisan. As soon as you're elected, you should be sworn in. Now, I mean, that's a fair take. He's also self interested. He wants his discharge petition voted on. So that is an element of it, but I think it's a fair take as well. Now, what could be the reason for Mike Johnson not to swear in this Democrat? Well, she's a communist, so you're not going to cry too much about it, but there is an actual legal basis, according to theconversation.com. House Speaker's refusal to seat Arizona representative is supported by history and the law. So Speaker Johnson, he is responsible for making the swearing in happen, is claiming that the government shutdown meant that he had to wait for the federal government to open in order to swear her in. Now, in the spring of 2021, which was more than 4 years ago, Nancy Pelosi, then at the time Speaker, she waited 25 years before administering the oath to a Republican elect. And as a result, now Mike Johnson says that he's going to call that the Pelosi precedent, because this guy sits around all day long just looking at focus group tested terms like the Schumer shutdown, or as he's now calling it, the Seinfeld shutdown. And he tries to message it. He's going to hold up this woman, and I haven't even mentioned her name. What is her name? She's got a Latina name. It's Grijalva. Grijalva. She's not been sworn in. So, and back to the conversation.com. I think it's worth this last piece before we move on. At the first session of Congress, every general election of representatives, the oath of office shall be administered by any member of the House of Representatives to the Speaker and by the Speaker to all members of the delegates present. So anybody can swear in Mike Johnson, and then he's got to swear in everybody, and he's not doing it. And just for context of who Mike Johnson is and how he's so performative in nature, and how he's going to say it's the Pelosi precedent, and he's just a good Christian conservative man who's really concerned about not passing a continuing resolution that he promised he wouldn't do 2 years ago. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that this is going to be a minibus, so I guess it's not an omnibus or a continuing resolution. It's actually a combination of an omnibus and a continuing resolution. He didn't make any promises there. This is Mike Johnson, and he's showing you his rage as it pertained to the government shutdown, which is soon to be over. Mike Johnson, he wants to be nice Mike, not mean Mike.
No, I didn't say that. I did not say that, Reed. I said none of us can guarantee an outcome on that. I have said consistently all along, this is part of the deliberative process. We're going to debate and discuss that. And there are debates and discussions going on our side of the aisle and on theirs, but to get everybody together and build that consensus is not possible until we get the government operating again and we stop holding I get very upset about that. We stop holding the American people hostage for these ridiculous political games. People see what's going on here. We should not have Border Patrol agents not paid right now because Chuck Schumer wants to pay political games to cover his tail. I don't know how much more simply to say that, and every single one of you know that's exactly what's going on. I don't like being mad, Mike. I want to be happy, Mike. I want to be the happy warrior, but I am so upset about this.
He's just so upset about it. Why are you making me be the mad Mike? Guy's completely performative, and he's not a very good actor. All right, I guess the good thing that we have about the government reopening isn't on top of being able to now swear in an elected Democrat in order to force a petition, to force a vote on the Epstein, is it we can refocus our priorities on the real crime out there. We have the pipe bomb revelations, which Brianna Morella, friend of the Suspendables, has said that she's reached out to the FBI, and the FBI says the investigation continues. I guess they're not accepting Steve Baker and Joe Hanneman's Big J journalism, where they identified Shawnee Kirkhoff as the pipe bomber. But they're also kind of distracted because they're focusing on some really big and important investigations, not just the idea that a weapon of mass destruction would have been dropped in our nation's capital 5 years ago, and they've made no progress despite offering a $500,000 reward. There's a new corruption issue that is afoot that needs to be investigated, which is why we need to give an $11 billion federal law enforcement agency all of its money so that it can focus in on professional athletes being dirtbags.
Two Cleveland Guardians pitchers are facing federal charges in a shocking pitch rigging sports betting scandal. Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase, both from the Dominican Republic, were indicted Sunday on counts of wire fraud conspiracy, honest services fraud, bribery to fix games, and money laundering. The pair has been on paid leave since July while investigators dug deeper. Clase, the team's relief pitcher, allegedly began throwing rigged pitches in 2023, taking bribes and kickbacks from bettors in exchange. Prosecutors say that led to $400,000 in fraudulent wagers on betting platforms. Ortiz, a starting pitcher, joined in this year after signing his contract, supposedly pulling in $60,000 in bribes from just 1 month of fixed pitches. U.S. Attorney Joseph Nocella called it a betrayal of baseball's trust, saying they sold out the Guardians, MLB, and fans by letting corruption infiltrate America's pastime. Ortiz was arrested in Boston Sunday, but Clase remains out of custody. MLB and the Guardians are fully cooperating with the probe, which is still underway.
And we're going to try to connect you to the basketball guys because we're a very, very serious law enforcement organization right now who's not focusing on weapons of mass destruction, but on corruption within gambling rings in professional sports. I don't know if anybody caught it there. And there's an adjoining piece that I found over at ABC News that I can throw up here. The amount of loss or the amount of money that was wagered and illicitly, I guess, won or earned by these bettors was $400,000. In total, rigging those pitches, they caused bettors to win $400,000 in fraudulent wagers, according to investigators. The bettors agreed to pay them $5,000 in bribes each, and I guess one of them made $60,000, so I guess he threw 12 pitches into the dirt. $400,000 does not meet the threshold for any federal prosecutor, with the exception of if it happened on an Indian reservation. That's the only time I've ever seen that happen. $1 million minimum is generally the number that they want to see. Yeah, or it has to be of particular public interest, which this is. So for $400,000, you would bring that fraud to a federal prosecutor as an agent, or even as the victim, just walk right into the U.S. Attorney's office and say, hey, look, I got ripped off $400,000. That could be a life-changing amount of money for just about everybody who isn't a Major League Baseball player or an influencer like the great Julie Kelly, who could drop $400,000 into a Democrat's campaign fund just like nothing, I'm sure. I mean, just spitballing here what you could do with it. But $400,000 is a lot of money for most people, not enough for a federal prosecutor. And the bigger offices, the more prominent ones, they would need another zero at the end of that. It wouldn't just be $1 million. It would be a $10 million scheme for them to even contemplate opening a case, which is the kind of tie a bow on it. What is who is bringing this? What is the office bringing this charge? So I went and found the press release, as I'm wont to do on the American Radicals podcast. This comes from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. I mean, outside the Southern District, the Eastern District is one of the most prominent, high-profile federal prosecutors' offices. And yet they sought a $400,000 baseball scheme because we're really prioritizing what's important here. And while that's going on, and we're devoting resources to that and not to locating a terrorist. What happens with the people who actually engage in violence against federal agents? Are you going to have their back? And, this isn't the fault of the prosecutors or the law enforcement agencies. It's actually the fault of the people, but it's worth bringing up as being an example of an egregious action here. This comes from CBS News. Headline: Man who threw a sandwich at federal agent in D.C. found not guilty of a misdemeanor after trial. You remember, this is a misdemeanor because the Department of Justice was unable to secure an indictment for felony charges because it happened in Washington, D.C., and the people there just wanted this guy to walk. Now, this individual, his name is Sean Dunn. He got acquitted in a misdemeanor trial, took it all the way to trial. Now, according to the affidavit, and we did play the video, but earmuffs, kid-friendly, I'm going to kind of avoid that one today. He yelled, "F you, you effing fascist. Why are you here? I don't want you in my city." And then he later returned and threw a sandwich into the chest of the federal agent. Now, in court, when this agent was sitting on the stand, witness stand, recalling the events of that day in the prosecution of Sean Dunn for a misdemeanor assault on an agent, the gallery and the jury laughed at him. The agent said that he could feel the sandwich hit him through his ballistic vest and exploded all over him. He could smell it. I mean, look, his life wasn't necessarily at great risk, but now we have a precedent, and the precedent is pretty clear. If you do a crime in Washington, D.C., and you're a communist, you will not be held accountable. But if you happen to vote for one white guy over another one and have some reasonable questions about the outcome of an election, which we had mailing in ballots, and then during the counting, we were putting up cardboard boxes and wood placards to obstruct the view of the counting. And we went to bed and one guy was ahead, and we woke up, the other guy was ahead, and there were entire districts that were 100% for the one guy and 0 for the other, which is unheard of. Well, you might be engaging in an insurrection, or at least we'll go through whatever we have to in order to characterize it that way. If we have to shoot you in the head with a less than lethal, if we have to have a sworn member of a law enforcement agency go out and pretend to be a terrorist so we can connect it to you, then we will. But if you're willing to go and assault a federal agent for the cause, for the communist cause, engage in pretty egregious action there on camera, no dispute about it, you get to walk. It's interesting to compare and contrast Sean Dunn with a Dexter Taylor. Remember, he was the guy from New York who was an engineer, and he built, as they said, ghost guns. He just built guns and put them in a safe. He liked to study ballistics. He wasn't even shooting them. And because he had an online purchase of parts, the Department of Justice flagged that. And because there's a Second Amendment in this country, the Second Amendment exists to prevent the federal government from having the ability to come to your door and blast you in the face. But, if they can incite you to do something, they'll definitely do that. But because Dexter Taylor had bought certain parts so that he could assemble guns in his house in accordance with his God-given Second Amendment right, the feds couldn't do anything. So they just handed it off to state officials. And the state officials came in and arrested Dexter Taylor and convicted him in a state court in which a judge said that the Second Amendment doesn't matter in this court. And now Dexter Taylor is sitting for a decade, 10 years in Rikers Island, because he was under the false presupposition that in this country, if you believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that you're going to have some modicum of protection. No, don't you dare. No. Why would you perish the thought of having that egregious opinion? Well, that's the Second Amendment. Well, what about the First Amendment? And that's in New York and Washington, D.C. What about Texas? Blood red Texas? Well, apparently not, because this is reported from the DallasExpress.com. Headline exclusive: Texas Good Old Boys Club versus First Amendment. Crottinger arrested over a meme. This has shades of Douglas Mackey or Peter Stinson, but it's a local arrest. Now, your individual here who was arrested and pictured, you can see he's a vet. His name is Colton Crottinger, community activist from Granbury arrested about a week ago for, quote, online impersonation. He was accused of making posts to Facebook that appeared to come from another local political activist. He did what my buddy and Suspendables buddy Burt Macklin does. He made a troll posting that made it look like one guy who doesn't like the other guy normally and is running for office. I guess they're rivals that are running against each other for a school board or something to the effect. He made it look like he was endorsing his opponent. So he got arrested. That's First Amendment protected activity. But how dare you? How dare you do that? And I mean, you could make a case, maybe if there's something fraudulent, like you were out there representing yourself to truly be that person. But is that a criminal matter or is that a civil matter? That's more of a defamation issue. If you're out there putting out a fake online account saying, well, I'm John Smith and I'm running for Congress and I'm endorsing my opponent, you have to be a below room temperature IQ to believe that that's true. You have to be the person that's probably willing to fall for a Julie Kelly text message trap in order to believe that. But because this guy Krottinger was advocating actively for conservatives and for Republicans, the system weaponized against him. It always seems to go one way, doesn't it? Oh, and as part of the conditions for this egregious arrest, he's not allowed to engage in any social media activity. That's what he does professionally. So now your government's taken away his ability to earn an income to feed his family. Egregious. I found probably a more worthy story, and it's probably a good thing that it was addressed locally. And I don't know if it's necessarily within the vein of what we've been discussing today, but it was close to my house. And I didn't see it reported anywhere in local news or national news. I had to find it from international news. Let's just bring it up there because the land of Milcahuddy has some problem. This comes from the BBC, and it's about a fake nurse who was arrested in Florida after seeing more than 4,000 patients. The BBC is terrible for visual, so I'm just going to leave it down right now. But this woman's name is Autumn Bardiza. She was employed in Palm Coast, which is about 30 minutes from my house, 29 years old, and she saw about 4,500 patients while pretending to be a nurse. She found a individual who had the same first name as her, Autumn, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's me. I just got married and I changed my name." And she never provided a marriage license and treated patients from June 2024 to January 2025, so about 6-7 months, 4,500 patients. What's their recourse? She was giving them medical advice or actually treatment and nothing. This is a sheriff's matter. Seems like that should probably rise to the concern of the feds, but they're really, really worried about finding Capitol Police officers. I'm sorry, the investigation continues. All right, and we can pivot away from though the law enforcement matters, and I want to talk about a couple things here as we are definitely worth going into some economic stuff and some concerns that I have that are pretty egregious. So first, let's talk about the tariffs, and I'm gonna spare you the nerdiness too much, but I did cover it on Saturday's show about the tariff trial that's going on from the Supreme Court and how the Solicitor General for the United States was arguing that the emergency tariffs that were implemented by the Trump administration, they really weren't for revenue raising. And they had been dishonest about that. They told us that we need these tariffs to restore a trade imbalance, and we're going to use tariffs to fund the government. And the numbers just didn't bear out. Those emergency tariffs would have accounted for roughly 2% of all the income that our government brings in, not to mention how much it spends, and it spends way more than it takes in. So the numbers just don't match up to that. But at the time, I told you, tariffs are not on foreign countries. Ultimately, when you do the bottom line, baseline review, they're not on those foreign countries or those foreign companies mostly. I mean, some of them absorb it to a certain extent, but ultimately, they pass those costs along to the consumer. The people who are buying the goods and the materials pay a higher price for it. So that tariff, that tax is passed on to your people who buy it. Now you're trying to dissuade them from buying foreign and buy American. I think you could probably make the case that you're ergo subsidizing domestic jobs by taxing other people. So that's a concern about wealth redistribution, but at least it might be for patriotic reasons that you're running a country and not an economy, I guess is what I've heard it characterized as. But what is the actual nuts and bolts? What is the actual cost to you because of our tariffs, which we've now been informed are not necessarily for raising revenue? So what are they for? But this comes from unusualwhales.com. Headline is that 70.5% of the new tariffs were passed on to consumers. Congratulations, you're paying that cost. The effects have been muted up to this point, though, because many of the companies that were selling inventory or selling products to people, they were anticipating the tariffs, so they stocked up ahead of time. But we're about to start seeing the full impact as those costs get passed along to the American people just in time for Christmas. Congratulations again to you all. And for perspective of how much money was brought in by tariffs. So during fiscal year 2024, which would have been October 23 till September of 2024, that was all during the Biden administration, $77 billion. Well, we've raised tariffs now, so you would expect that amount to have gone up significantly, and it has. So in the last 3 months of the Biden administration, plus the first 9 months of the Trump administration, so majority, 3/4 Trump administration, since they've had the ability to and actually have increased tariffs, we've gone from $77 billion hitting the federal government's coffers to now $195 billion, not even a 3x increase. And just so you know, that pays for like 2.5% of our government. The government spends $19 billion a day. So that would be 10 days of government spending. Not 365, 10. 10 days of government spending, but all those costs get passed along to you, and it's not revenue raising. That's pretty egregious to me. And the adjoining piece that I have for that and is equally egregious, particularly as we're talking about wealth redistribution and concerns about that, was that our president put out this idea of a tariff refund. It's a dividend, as President Trump calls it, a $2,000 per person dividend as a result of all these awesome tariffs that we've brought in. Now, I remember a time not too long ago when we were told to stay home and stay safe and don't go to your non-essential job, the job that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage, but just wait on your stimmy check. Now, the stimmy checks that people got were $1,200 a piece. This is for $2,000 a piece. So it's an increase, the amount of money. But when they gave everybody $1,200, I believe that was, what was the total cost? Oh yeah, it was $300 billion. So I know I'm throwing some numbers at you just to recap. We've brought in $200 billion. We spend $19 billion a day, but we've brought in $200 billion in a year of tariffs. And if we went to the stimmy checks that were $1,200, it would cost $300 billion. But we want to go to stimmy checks that are more than that, which would cost $400 billion. We're bringing in 200 and we want to spend $400 billion. That seems like a really bad plan. It seems like we're going to spend money that we don't have in order to make people feel happy because they get a stimmy check, and haven't connected the dots that by putting out $400 billion into the system, by adding more dollars out there, it leads to more dollars chasing the goods out there, which leads to the prices increasing. That's how inflation works. The government prints money, borrows money, puts it into the system, and it makes the dollars that you save and put into your bank account worth less and less and less until they become worthless. You're spending all your time working for the government, and what do you have for it? Well, you get a nice $2,000 stimmy check. Of course, the costs that you incur as a result of that are more than $2,000, so you lose. But the government's going to expect a thank you. If you don't, if you raise a concern, and maybe you go on a hobbyist podcast like this one and say, that doesn't make sense. Well, now you sound like an anti-government extremist. Somebody who would engage in an insurrection. And there's a gross relationship that exists and continues to exist between our government and technology companies that are out there, and technology companies that are engaged in things that you should know are fraudulent and yet allowed. So I follow this piece over at Reuters. And it's about Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook. They are earning billions of dollars for fake advertising. So let me throw this up there. This is wild stuff. And how we have a federal law enforcement apparatus that is interested in looking at baseball players for $400,000 and not necessarily interested in a giant tech company, which is pushing artificial intelligence more and more and more on us. But because their CEO or owner or founder or whatever Mark Zuckerberg is now, who went along with the last administration of suppressing American speech, but he does jujitsu and he's based now, so he's probably a good thing. We're not going to look at this. But this piece from Reuters is shocking and disturbing and egregious. So Reuters got access to some internal documents, and let me throw it up. It appears that Meta earns 10% of all of its money from running advertisements for scams. That's $16 billion that goes to Meta. And it comes from advertising that are running scams and banned goods. Now, these documents had a couple other things in here. It's user base, people who use Meta. They're exposed to $22 billion scams every single day. And that's on top of $15 billion scam ads that are presented. So it's not just the advertisements, it's the postings that go on there. So now we're in the area of over 30 billion fraudulent postings, and Meta is just accepting the money. Now, Meta only bans advertisers if its automated systems predict that the marketers are at least 95% certain to be committing fraud. So the 94% that was used to identify the pipe bomber, they have a higher threshold at Meta. You have to be 95% certain that this is a scam in order for them to take it down, because they're really concerned about free speech there. No, definitely not to pocket $16 billion. Now, in the internal documents, Meta's actually, there's conversations going on between various principals within the corporation. They're weighing the costs of beefing up their enforcement on these scam ads. And they're saying, well, it's going to cost us a lot of money internally to actually go out against them. And if we do, we're going to miss out on that sweet, sweet revenue. So maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should just let the regulatory agencies come after us, because that only costs us $1 billion. So we spend $1 billion in penalties for allowing fraudulent ads, but we take in 16 billion. So it's just a cost of doing business. That seems like a pretty good return on investment. Now, they had a spokesperson from Meta who came forward. His name is Andy Stone. The quote from him is priceless. Quote, "Over the past 18 months, we have reduced user reports of scam ads globally by 58%. And so far in 2025, we've removed more than 134 million pieces of scam ad content." 134 million. You're exposing your users to 35 billion a day. That's on par with the amount of revenue that we bring in through tariffs. Drop in the ocean. But $16 billion right now going to Meta every single year for trying to scam you, the people who use it. They don't care about you. It's pretty egregious. All right, we've got one more, and it's worth going into a little bit in depth, because this one I found particularly abhorrent. Being a math guy, being a finance kind of guy, I can look at the numbers, as you can tell and have discussed here, about the scam ads and about the tariffs. Numbers just don't add up to me. And that gets me thinking that something else is a problem here. And I want to close this out today and just with a discussion about this new idea being put out there about 50-year mortgages, and how even the best intentions, unless you do second and third order thinking, you damn yourself to dire consequences. So to lead it off, let's bring up this piece by Fortune, which is talking about the Trump administration. They're working on 50-year options for mortgages. So move over 30-year mortgage. We're going to 50. We're going bigger and badder. So the Trump administration is going to introduce 50-year fixed rate mortgages. The problem with that, as it's being billed, is that it's not going to necessarily reduce the prices of houses. Now, go with me on this. We have a concept here that is just flawed. The notion going around is that young people, they can't buy houses, they can't afford them because they cost too much. Well, so naturally, how are we going to bring down the cost? Well, we're not going to bring down the overall cost. We'll just bring down the payments. And this goes back to a Dave Ramsey-ism. Rich people, financially secure people, they ask how much. Poor people, financially illiterate people, they ask how much are the payments. But what we're going to do is expand out 30 years to 50, which will put people in debt for half of a century. And when we do that, it'll bring down their costs by a couple $100 a month. Now, that presumes that people are going to then take that little bit of wiggle room and not try to upgrade in house, which we know that they'll do. And also, by bringing down the payment per month, we're going to allow access to more people. Well, it's kind of like my conversation about inflation. What happens when more people can buy houses? Well, there's more demand. There's a limited supply. That would mean the prices go up. So now we're going to sack people up with 50 years of debt, which means that they're going to be paying interest for an extra 20 years. And the prices aren't going to come down at all. But nobody's doing the second order and third order thinking. Oh, and just as an add-on to that, there's also a discussion about the feds getting invested in investment companies like they did with Intel. So the federal government is going to take your dollars, your tax dollars, and invest in real estate companies, loaners. So now we'll federalize loans. So when people can't afford them over 50 years because you've now expanded the total time that they be on the hook, you've now increased the likelihood that they will default. How is that going to handle? Oh, well, the federal government just swoop on in. Are they going to take property from people? Are the feds going to seize your property? Are they then going to sell it off at a discount because they have to get it cleared off the books, which will lead people to be homeless? And who's going to buy those? Well, the BlackRocks of the world will buy it. So then you can just rent forever. You'll own nothing. I'm not saying this is a giant conspiracy. I think it's more likely that nobody's actually thought through the process and they want to cure that short-term pain and say, look, we're going to get you into a house. Now you'll be able to afford the payments. Aren't you happy? And nobody's thought through how it's ultimately not going to reduce housing costs. It's actually going to inflict a lot more pain. All right. I have reached the end of the show for today, the American Radicals podcast. But I do have a biblical worldview that I want to get to. I think it's sort of in keeping with how I spent the first half and tried to tie it to the second half with egregious action on behalf of our government. And I want to get to that. So that's Romans chapter 13, verse 4. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Sorry, guys, I'm losing my voice here. I'm not totally over the RFK thing. I'm struggling, but good thing is we got through it all. But what I want to connect this to is the Romans 13. It's incumbent on our government, the forces that we empower, that we give up a little bit of our liberty so that we can have a social compact in which our rights are protected against fraud and force. And if they do not use that power to punish evil, by definition, they punish good. And I think that's what we saw with the pipe bomb. I laid it out, speculated. As always, it is a hobbyist podcast, just my opinion. But we'll have to be a little bit more patient. I don't think we'll have to wait 6 to 8 months, though. I think Steve Baker, Joe Hanneman, they're on it. They're bringing facts all the time, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they got. And for today's palate cleanse, it is November 11th. It is Veterans Day. It's also my marriage anniversary, so happy anniversary, hon. But wanted to make sure that we acknowledged a little bit of the vets today. Make sure you go out there, get your free waffles. And then I found this cool training video about how hard work makes you perfect. It made me think of those guys out there who swore the oath to protect and defend the Constitution, lay down their lives for it. It's just a fun video about how they might be actually working out to get themselves ready for the fight.
It's the same old theme since 1916. Eeyore-head, they're still fighting with their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns. Eeyore-head, they are dying. What's in your head?
All right, guys, they're getting it. They're getting it. Make sure if you know with that, if you're neighbors with one, you're friends with one, just give them a thank you today. Thank you for their service. I am sure that those guys will all just say, don't thank me. I volunteered. Don't thank me. I got a paycheck. But they are humble and they deserve a day. So here's me over at the AmRad Pod offering thanks to them for their service today. And that will do it for us today on the AmRad Pod. We will plan to be back with you Thursday. Hopefully the voice is going to be back at 100%, not just the 94% certainty that we identified the pipe bomber. 100%. That's what we endeavor for today. And we'll be back Thursday, 10:30 on rumble.com/AmRadPod and YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe, give us a 5-star review and rating on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and give us a share on @XAmericaNews. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals Podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AM